Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to watch your entire world, your faith, your life's work, your sanctuary, reduced to ash in a single morning? To hear the clash of swords echo through sacred halls where only chants once rose? This is the story of such a day when heaven met horror and the unthinkable became reality. On an ordinary day in one of these remote monasteries, life followed a devout rhythm. Before the sun touched the horizon, monks rose in silence and filed into the chapel, barefoot and cloaked in woolen habits, chanting prayers that echoed gently through stone halls. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and incense. Mornings were for prayer and quiet labour, tending to herb gardens, copying scripture, or illuminating manuscripts with breathtaking precision. Their world was one of sacred ritual, built on order, peace, and the belief that their devotion brought light into the world. But unease had begun to seep into their lives. Whispers of raids, far to the west and north, began to reach even these isolated corners. Tales of monstrous ships of flame and blood, of holy men slain or stolen, slowly spread among the brothers. At first, disbelief offered comfort. Surely no one would dare defile a place of worship. Surely the Lord would protect his own. But the rumours persisted. As threats drew closer, some monasteries began to prepare. Valuables were hidden beneath chapel stones or buried in the earth. Entrances were reinforced with what little timber and stone they could spare. Watchmen took turns scanning the horizon, their hearts sinking every time fog rolled in thick from the sea. And still they prayed. They prayed that the raiders would pass them by, that their faith would shield them from the chaos unravelling across Christendom. In those final moments before an attack, fear pressed on every breath. Monks clutched crosses and whispered the psalms. Some fled into the forests with what relics they could carry. Others stayed behind, unwilling to abandon the altar, resolved to meet violence with peace and death with prayer. The terror of those moments, the silence before the storm, the helpless waiting, would be etched into memory. Even when the buildings burned and voices were silenced, the monastery, once a fortress of serenity, now stood on the precipice of ruin. These sacred enclaves, often isolated in picturesque settings, on remote islands, nestled within green valleys, or atop windswept cliffs, provided monks with solitude and peace necessary for reflection and scholarly pursuits. Their communities, steeped in devotion and discipline, attracted pilgrims seeking spiritual enlightenment, nobles wishing to display their piety, and kings eager to legitimize their rule through generous donations. In the late 8th century, across the tranquil shores and lush landscapes of medieval Europe, monasteries emerged as powerful symbols of faith, learning, and immense wealth. Monasteries such as Cluny in Francia became influential centres of cultural and intellectual life, developing extensive libraries filled with meticulously copied manuscripts, ancient texts of wisdom and religious insight, adorned with exquisite illuminations crafted from precious pigments and gold leaf. These manuscripts, produced painstakingly by monks working under candlelight, represented the pinnacle of medieval scholarship and devotion. Moreover, monasteries often became custodians of immense material wealth. Kings and wealthy patrons donated gold chalices, silver crosses, intricately carved reliquaries, and sacred relics such as fragments purported to be from the true cross, or bones of revered saints. These treasures, accumulating quietly yet significantly over generations, made monasteries tempting targets for those who valued earthly riches more than spiritual wealth. Their peaceful nature and the monks' commitment to non-violence, however, left these havens particularly vulnerable to sudden, devastating raids. Among these peaceful sanctuaries stood Lindisfarne, known affectionately as the Holy Island, nestled off the windswept coast of Northumbria in northeastern England. Established in the 7th century by the revered Irish monk St Aidan, Lindisfarne became a spiritual lighthouse, attracting monks, scholars, and pilgrims seeking enlightenment from across Europe. The monastery was renowned for its devout religious practices and dedication to scholarship, becoming one of medieval Europe's most significant religious centres. At Lindisfarne, monks meticulously crafted works of immense cultural and religious importance, notably the famed Lindisfarne Gospels. This treasured manuscript, produced around the early 8th century, was a masterpiece of monastic artistry, its pages intricately adorned with vivid illustrations and exquisite Celtic knotwork. Using vibrant pigments derived from rare minerals and precious metals like gold and silver, The scribes dedicated countless hours under the dim glow of candlelight, pouring their devotion into every elaborate detail. Beyond manuscripts, Lindisfarne housed numerous sacred relics and religious artifacts, often gifted by influential patrons who believed such generosity would secure spiritual favour. Ornate reliquaries containing fragments of saints, jewel-encrusted crosses and golden chalices were carefully safeguarded within the monastery's sacred walls. This extraordinary accumulation of wealth and spiritual significance not only elevated Lindisfarne's prestige, but also inadvertently attracted the attention of those driven by darker ambitions, setting the stage for the devastation that was soon to follow. In the year 793, the serenity of Lindisfarne was irrevocably shattered. It was a quiet June morning, the sun barely cresting the horizon, as monks assembled solemnly for their daily prayers. Suddenly, an unnatural stillness settled upon the monastery grounds, only to be swiftly replaced by an uneasy sense of dread. Emerging ominously from the morning mist came the unmistakable silhouettes of Viking longships, vessels carved with fierce dragon heads and powered by dozens of fearsome warriors, poised for destruction. Chroniclers of the period vividly recounted supernatural omens forewarning this tragic event. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle described violent storms that battered the coastline days before the attack, lightning crackling menacingly across darkened skies. Monks spoke of eerie, blazing skies at night, illuminated by mysterious fires that seemed to dance and ripple across the horizon. Even more terrifying were vivid accounts of dragons seen soaring through the heavens, spewing flames as though the very fabric of the world was tearing open, portending doom. These unsettling signs, recorded meticulously by medieval scribes, were later interpreted as divine warnings, punishments perhaps, or tests of faith sent by God. The monks who had devoted their lives to peace and contemplation stood paralysed by shock and fear, unprepared for the violence about to be unleashed. The Viking ships moved swiftly and silently, closing the distance with terrifying precision, setting the stage for a cataclysmic event that would echo through history as a grim harbinger of the Viking Age. The Norsemen arrived with terrifying precision, their longships grinding onto the shore with a chilling finality. Monks scattered helplessly, prayers dissolving into cries of fear and desperation. Vikings, fierce warriors driven by an insatiable hunger for riches, stormed the gates with axes and swords, splintering sanctuary doors and desecrating sacred spaces without hesitation. Flames erupted swiftly, engulfing wooden buildings and priceless manuscripts alike. Among the stolen treasures were gold chalices adorned with intricate filigree and precious gemstones, meticulously crafted silver crosses bearing detailed carvings of biblical scenes, and elaborate reliquaries sparkling with jewels, each containing sacred relics believed to hold divine power. The legendary Lindisfarne Gospels narrowly escaped total destruction, though other invaluable manuscripts illuminated with gold and rare pigments were lost forever to fire or seized by greedy hands. Accounts from chroniclers detail the unimaginable scale of loss. A silver altar, gifted by the King of Northumbria, vanished during the raid, along with ornate ceremonial vestments embroidered with golden threads, precious oils and incense imported from distant lands, and rare silk tapestries woven with scenes of biblical significance. These invaluable objects, symbols of devotion and artistry, were reduced to mere plunder, eagerly divided among the victorious warriors. The profound spiritual and cultural devastation left in their wake would resonate throughout the Christian world for generations. This brutal raid was not an isolated incident, but marked the beginning of a broader wave of devastation that would sweep across Europe for generations. In 802, just a few years after the horrors at Lindisfarne, the Abbey of Iona, perched on a rugged, windswept island off the western coast of Scotland, faced the fury of the Vikings. Founded in the 6th century by St. Columba, Iona had long been revered as a beacon of Christian faith, learning and sanctuary. Pilgrims travelled great distances to reach this hallowed ground, and the abbey had accumulated a vast treasury of spiritual and material riches. Among the priceless items at Iona were hand-copied biblical texts, silver-bound psalters, ornately decorated altarpieces, and finely wrought reliquaries containing sacred remnants of saints. These relics were not just spiritual focal points, they were symbols of divine protection and heavenly authority. but they could not protect against the Viking onslaught. That year, the raiders came with savage intent. They descended upon Iona with brutal efficiency, cutting down monks who dared resist and sending others fleeing into the wilderness. The abbey was stripped of its valuables, chalices of hammered gold, incense holders from distant Byzantium, and illuminated gospel books painstakingly created over decades. All were taken or destroyed. Fire consumed buildings, manuscripts turned to ash, and the echo of sacred hymns was replaced by the clash of steel and cries of terror. Chroniclers would later recount the sacking of Iona not only as a tragedy of destruction, but as a devastating blow to the heart of Scottish Christianity. The abbey would suffer further attacks in the decades to follow, eventually forcing the monks to flee and relocate sacred relics to the relative safety of Kells in Ireland. Iona's fall was a symbol of the vulnerability even the holiest places faced in the shadow of the Norse tide. In France, monasteries such as Saint-Philibert de Grandlieu were repeatedly targeted throughout the 9th century. These raids not only destroyed buildings and manuscripts, but also shattered the very sense of safety and sanctity. Detailed chronicles from Saint-Philibert recount harrowing escapes and the desperate measures taken by monks who buried treasures in hidden caches, hoping to protect them from the marauders. Monks who survived these brutal Viking raids faced terrifying fates. Many were seized in the chaos, shackled, and forced aboard the very longships that had brought their tormentors to shore. These men, once devoted to lives of prayer and peace, were now commodities, transported across vast distances to be sold in foreign markets, as far as Constantinople, the glittering capital of the Byzantine Empire, or even the bustling trade hubs of Baghdad. In these distant lands, Christian monks were prized not only for their labour, but also for their literacy, often forced into servitude as scribes or household slaves, stripped of identity and homeland. At the same time, the sacred relics they once guarded with reverence were treated as mere spoils of war. Reliquaries of gold and silver, once containing bones of saints or vials of consecrated oil, were pried open, melted down, or sold piecemeal. Fragments of the true cross, believed to be among the most holy artifacts in Christendom, were desecrated, sometimes mocked in Norse sagas, or paraded as trophies. Illuminated manuscripts, lovingly adorned over decades with gold leaf and vibrant pigments, were burned for warmth, discarded, or used as bartering chips in the Norse trading economy. Viking sagas recount these raids vividly, often from the perspective of the Vikings themselves. Tales such as the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok recount attacks on monasteries filled with treasures that proved irresistible to the raiders. These sagas, celebrated around campfires and passed through generations, depict the monasteries not as sanctuaries of learning, but as wealthy, vulnerable targets, ripe for plunder. But, for the monks, the loss was not only material, but spiritual. Entire centuries of devotion, artistry, and scholarship were erased in moments. What remained was a chilling silence, broken only by the crackling of dying fires and the absence of sacred song. And yet the faith of those left behind did not extinguish. It flickered quietly in exile, biding its time to rebuild from the ashes of desecration. Amid these devastating tragedies, inspiring tales of resilience and courage emerged. At St. Bertin in Francia, monks risked their lives to protect the sacred legacy entrusted to them. Knowing full well the wrath they could provoke, they hid their most sacred relics beneath stone floors and inside walls, constructing false compartments and burying treasures in the night. Time and again, as Viking raiders stormed through their abbey, the monks maintained their composure, often returning to recover and re-hide their relics between attacks, an act of defiance against the overwhelming threat. In Ireland, the monastic community of Glendalough, nestled deep in the verdant Wicklow Valley, became a symbol of monastic perseverance. Time after time, their structures were burned, their brethren slain or scattered, and yet the survivors returned to rebuild, not just once but again and again. These monks, often with nothing but ashes and rubble before them, erected new churches, recopied what scriptures they could, and retrained novices in the sacred traditions. They planted gardens, restored bell towers, and lit candles in chapels once blackened by smoke. Their courage was not marked by sword or shield, but by their refusal to surrender the spiritual light they had vowed to uphold. Through prayer, labour, and unshakable devotion, these monastic communities stood against the tide of violence, preserving not only faith, but the very memory of Christian civilization in the darkest of times. Even Lindisfarne, though ravaged, was never fully abandoned. Its monks returned repeatedly, determined to restore their sacred site. Fragments of scorched manuscripts were carefully gathered, testament to their dedication to preserving knowledge and faith. These actions exemplified the monks' unwavering resolve to ensure their spiritual legacy endured despite overwhelming odds. The Viking raids left enduring scars on medieval Europe's monastic communities, yet they also highlighted a remarkable capacity for resilience. Monks, committed to peace, yet forged in the crucible of hardship, preserved their traditions and rebuilt their spiritual homes, undeterred by the violence they had faced. These harrowing tales, both of devastation and of hope, continue to resonate through history, reminding us of the enduring power of faith and resilience against overwhelming darkness. If you found this journey through history moving and powerful, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more immersive stories from the Viking Age. From the sacred halls of monasteries to the roaring seas of Norse raiders, we bring the past to life, one tale at a time.